Hello, everyone, and welcome to the public space. Today we have a relaxed conversation that may become hot because this is a subject that's critical for geeks like us. What are the best and worst movies of all time? And for this, we have Frame Game. How are you doing today, Frame Game?
I'm doing great. Happy Labor Day, JF and chat. I hope it is a labor of love.
It's a Labor Day. I hadn't even noticed. Well, I guess that's what happened when you're disconnected from the workplace and working conditions. All I do is YouTube now, and so I'm not even conscious when there's vacations or days off.
That's good. You've imposed your own reality on the world. The world now works on your schedule rather than vice versa. That's a blessing.
Absolutely, all those holidays. It's all a social construct.
It's not even a thing. I love it, dude. That's amazing.
All right. So I don't know in which order you would prefer going, but what we'll do is we will discuss a list of movies that we believe might be some of the best movies of all time. And we will have you vote at the end after our conversations. Some of them will be agreed upon by us too, that they are great movies. Some of them I might have objections, or Frame Game might have objections. So wait for the straw poll that will appear in the chat at the end of the first part. And then in the second part, we can talk about the worst movies of all time. Less interesting subjects, but very revealing, because sometimes movies are bad because they just display some terrible beliefs, and they are very subversive, especially the Disney ones. I find extremely dangerous in our society.
Yes, dangerous indeed. But I wanted to start. One of the reasons I'm looking forward to this conversation is because our incel debate has people have been dogging me on my channel with on in a positive way, but in a poking and prodding way. There's a lot of themes that came up in our discussion there that are unresolved, and I think are kind of a little bit of the fire and ice between our world philosophies. And so I wanted to propose my first pick for best movie ever as a direct assault on the principles of moral nihilism and the sort of involuntary celibate mindset, which I think has splash damage on the rest of culture. That is, I think everybody, it's like a normal distribution, a gradient, if you will, where everybody has a little bit of that thing in them. And it's just a question of how much. And Conan the Barbarian, the 1982 original classic starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, is the Mount Everest of anti-incel struggle for the glory of life. And I want to try to persuade you that it is one of the best movies of all time.
I have to say I hadn't watched Conan the Barbarian, so when you said that this was your intention to talk about it today, I had to watch it this afternoon. I cannot see how you're gonna make the case that this is one of the best movies of all time. I understand that in the historical context where it was released, it might have been okay, but the gory aspect of this movie are totally cringy because there are none. Essentially, it's a movie that could have led to gory hammer hits on the head, and you hear the crack of the head the way you do in Braveheart, but you don't. And so it looks like a cartoon movie. The actors are terrible. The plot storyline is a Kill Bill type storyline, you know. Everyone was killed in my surrounding and I'm gonna avenge myself. That makes sense. It's a basic plot line, but in a muscular man like this, it doesn't have the contrasting effect that you have in Kill Bill, because in Kill Bill, it's a woman and she's really, really pissed, and she really got killed. Her family got killed and she got raped while she was, incapable to move. I think that what Kill Bill succeeds at doing, this does it in a very banal fashion, in my view. And how cringe is the final scene where he starts rotating a ball of fire, and it's like that's the moment where the ball of fire should catch in the temple, and you should see the temple explodes with whatever explosive or TNT was there. But instead, what you have is the ball does boop 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 boop, and you see a little flame starting, and that's like the burning of the temple at the end. The plot is good. I'm not saying this is the worst movie of all time, but I'm saying it doesn't deserve place in my heart for the best movie of all time.
Okay, so let me present my case. It is now, and by the way, this is a symbolic. In addition to the enjoyment that I have from watching this movie, I'm going to try to present 7 reasons for why it is. It captures these 7 themes in a way that I think is almost mandatory for the modern man to watch. So the 7 themes are struggle, freedom, religion, ancestry, discipline, redemption, and purpose. So I want to just kind of go through these one by one if you think that is a good use of time.
Sure, go for it.
The first is struggle and life as struggle. And this is a continuing theme from our I think, instant classic debate of the incel question, which is where I think, and correct me if you think I'm not summarizing your views accurately here, but my thesis there was that when you transform your worldview into life as struggle, where the struggle is inevitable and you never allow yourself to call it quits, then you can transcend the mindset that traps you in the incel sort of mentality. And Conan the Barbarian is the story of this guy, this great beast of a man who goes from nothing. He goes from a slave, basically, to being the emperor of the entire kingdom. And he does this by spending the first 15 years chained to what's called the Wheel of Pain. So Conan the Barbarian, the movie, is built off, I believe, a comic strip. It may have been a book. I forget. I remember having looked at this many years ago. But in the mythos, Conan, he spends 15 years chained to the Wheel of Pain as a slave, before he is transferred into combat, where he basically is a gladiator for many years until he earns his freedom. And this act of being chained to the Wheel of Pain, but pushing it day after day for 15 years until you can finally use it in combat, or metaphorical combat for other people, and then not being given freedom but earning your freedom, I think is the kind of moral story arc that is it is the antithesis, and it is an affirmative assault on the kind of SJW, modern, regressive, and of politics and ideology of the left, and the cucking, give up, the world is burning and I'm just going to watch it mentality of much of the modern right. It transcends those, and it presents a timeless but new way to see the world. That struggle is not a bad thing. It is the only thing, and it's in fact a glorious thing, and that is the way to freedom. So I can go on and talk about freedom, but I don't know if you want to attack anything I said.
Well, I would say one aspect of this struggle, which is subversive in my view, it's that Conan the Barbarian is the victim of 2 injustice, if you will. On the one hand, there's the injustice that is done to his father and mother by just a gang of savages that just band of raiders, they are described as. So this band of raiders is the one that ultimately Conan, if I understand, will revolt himself against. Now, he's victim of a second injustice, which is to be involved in these in this kind of slave work of some kind, and then being involved in countless fights receiving training and education in the East. I'm reading here the Wikipedia page about it. So essentially, Conan is being exploited in two ways. On the one hand, his father and mother are getting killed and unjustly. On the other hand, he's getting exploited as a slave. But the big revolt of Conan the Barbarian, and the final key to this movie, is that he will succeed at avenging his father and mother, but not the slave part. And so I see it as a misdirected revolt, if you will. It's not that it was misdirected to want to avenge his father and mother, but he's not contesting the system of exploitation that he's faced with. He just flees from it.
He flees from it? How so?
Well, he's essentially, you say he's chained to a large mill, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And so this is not the system that will constitute the final vengeance of Conan. The final vengeance of Conan will be to get into the temple, and eventually, I believe that the people who killed his father are transformed into a kind of snake, and that would when he burns the temple, that represents his vengeance against those who killed his parents.
Right. Yes, but
and so he has no revolt against the system of slavery that has then used him as a child.
Oh, right. Yes. I mean, I'm not talking about slavery here. I'm talking about personal struggle and using transmuting the negative energy you would feel by being forced by circumstance into a life you don't want to lead, but having to push through it. And it's that I feel like many in the West feel like they're under. They feel helpless. They feel chained to a wheel of pain. They have watched things happen to their family or their neighborhoods or their country. And they are now in that phase of life that Conan was in, where you need to decide, am I going to give up? Or am I going to keep pushing that wheel of pain, knowing it's going to make me stronger, and knowing that that is the only way towards earning my eventual freedom? And I think it's very interesting the way that Conan receives freedom. He doesn't know what to do with it. You know, he's chased by wolves and ends up, he's. I think that's a very interesting theme as well. But I'll let you respond.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, since I really watched the video quick by clicking and advancing forward in it quite rapidly, I don't have a super in-depth view to give. However, what I will say is I believe Kill Bill, in terms of revolt against struggle, I prefer the Kill Bill approach. I prefer the woman who will just slash every human body on her path because they're all evil. Whereas Conan the Barbarian has more this naive approach where he doesn't just destroy everything in its path. And I think what I do like is the counsel at the beginning of the movie that his father, I believe it's his father, or it may have been just an old guy there, but he says it was his father. So he says, you can't trust anyone, man, woman, and beast, but you can trust this. And it's the steel sword.
Yep. Yeah, the direct. Yep, that's you must learn its discipline. For no one in this world can you trust. Not men, not women, not beasts.
No, it's relatively unfair to judge this movie by the standard of Kill Bill, because Kill Bill came after and we were more advanced in cinema history. But I do like to give that kind of retroactive review and say where Kill Bill has succeeded at showing me someone filled with so much just hate in the sense that she was so abused that there is no reason she would care about slashing through the body in her path toward obtaining vengeance. I think that Conan has a more shy approach with this kind of ultimate vengeance, the person who has nothing to lose.
I don't see any relation to Kill Bill. To me, it's the exact. I'll tell you why. It's the difference because the violence is totally incidental in this movie to me. I don't even see the violence. To me, it's about ancestry, and it's about really making the most of your potential, finding that thing inside you that you are, and connecting it. I mean, one of the things that's absent in Kill Bill, for example, is the relation to ancestry and purpose. So Conan has he is very deeply in touch with his ancestors, with his forefathers. He is a continuation of that lineage, and he has a purpose in life to solve the riddle of steel.
That is
This
true. That is true. It's totally missing from Kill Bill. I think it's rational that it's missing because Kill Bill is about this kind of bubble of life that says, all right, I don't even care about having babies. At this point, I'm just here to kill. You're correct. It is an incomplete aspect of Kill Bill.
Yeah, because to me, there's something very primal about there's a Conan inside of all of us. I don't think there's a Uma Thurman character in all of us. There's the violence in Kill Bill is totally mindless. With Conan, it is all on the path. And one of the things that I think is amazing is this line where Conan is he's an imperfect protagonist, right? First, he's just kind of a dumb warrior. And then he is kind of a stoic conqueror. And then he falls from grace. He gets drunk. He in that one scene, he punches a camel just for no reason. And he gets rich. He gets a ton of booty. And then he passes out in a bowl of soup. He wakes up. There's armed guards all around him. And he gets taken out. He loses everything. But one thing he never lost. And that was the discipline of steel. There's this great line in the movie where he says, but where the narrator says, and this is amazing. The guy's tone of voice is just perfect. He says, but always there was the discipline of the steel. Like no matter what was happening in his life, he had one thing, and that was his craft, being a swordsman. No matter what else, he might have gotten drunk, he might have gotten lazy, he might have had a good or bad day, but he always trained his craft in the discipline of the steel. That's one of the things that I think you do very well as the host of this program, is that you do it every day. You have a discipline of the steel. And one of the things that I think is missing from those who drop out in society is they don't have that one thing. They don't have that discipline of the steel, and that is the way to redemption.
All right. That's a good case. Now, was there any other branches you wanted to explore? Because personally, I said everything I had to say on Conan.
I have one more thing, which is the aspect of religion, and more particularly micro-religion. One of the things that I think is causing this social dropout is the lack of a unifying ideology that transcends the base day-to-day living and gives you something bigger than yourself, bigger than your own life, and something that's timeless and eternal. And this movie explores religion in a really fascinating way that I think offers it offers a mindset that atheists can adopt that will allow them to have the benefits of religion, that is stability, hope, purpose, without the drawbacks of it, which are rigid dogma and illiberal logic, or not being science-minded in your logic. So the whole concept of Crom in this movie is very interesting. So everyone has a personal god. There's this great scene in the movie where Conan is having a debate, a little bit of prehistoric internet blood sports with the thief that he liberated. And they're roasting like a squirrel over a fire. And they're having a debate about who do you pray to? And Conan very confidently says, I pray to Crom, the god of the earth. And this thief says, ha, I laugh at your God. I pray, my God is the God of the sky. He is the God above you. And there's this moment where sort of for the first time, Conan, who has been told what God is by his father, is confronted with a argument, a real-time debate over whether or not someone else's God might be better than his own. And he has to struggle with that for the rest of the movie. The final battle scene where he makes this impassioned plea to Crom, where he says, Crom, I have never prayed to you before. I have no tongue for it. Not one, not even you, will remember if we were good men or bad, why we fought or why we died. All that matters is that two stood against many, and that's what's important. Valor pleases you, Crom. So grant me one request. Grant me revenge. And if you do not listen, then the hell with you. This to me is the perfect relationship. I wouldn't frame it as revenge, obviously. I would frame it as maybe justice or strength. But this relationship that you tap into the beliefs of your ancestors, but you also have your own. You stand your own ground. It's like what that 50 Cent song where he's like, I pray to God every night, but I have a handgun under my bed or something like that. I think
Mm-hmm.
that is the appropriate. If we imported that into the modern zeitgeist, that philosophy, I think that would be the way to navigate an atheistic world. What do you think on the religion point?
So you're essentially saying that this movie presents an atomization of beliefs such that you shouldn't have to adhere to the old dogma of a religion, but you should be able to take pieces of it.
Yes, that it allows you to have multiple faiths that different people may have around you, but be able to have your own that is solid and to tap into it, whether or not you even deeply believe in it. Because all through the movie, we're told that Conan believes in Crom. His father prayed to Crom. He confidently boasted in the beginning that Crom is his god. But there in that final battle scene, when he's up against an entire army by himself, he reveals, Crom, I have never prayed to you before, but give me strength now. I think that is a way that we can all sort of tap into micro religion in the ideologies we have without having to. You don't need to be a perfect. You don't need to be a perfect student of a religion to draw strength from it. And I see him drawing strength from it in a beautiful way.
I would agree with you, but I tend to think that religious people probably disagree with you. I agree with you as an atheist and as someone who has taken, I've been educated in Catholicism and I've taken many of my behaviors from the Bible. But I tend to think that religious conservatives in the US would probably disagree with you and would say, the Bible, it's a all or none thing. People like Nick Fuentes would probably tell you, once you accept the truth of God, it's all of it. You cannot take pieces of it.
Right. But what I would say is that this movie is a movie for atheists. It's religion. Conan the Barbarian equals religion for atheists, functional religion.
All right. I think you made a good case for this movie. I still don't see it among the top 10 for the reasons you give, but I think that you made a fair case for it being a decent and good movie. So let's move on to a next movie. I'm going to start with my strongest. I'm going to start with the one that I believe is probably the best movie of all time, Fight Club. Fight Club is a solid movie. It integrates many things and it sends you red herrings. There's so much stuff in Fight Club that they can afford the luxury of sending you red herrings, which kind of misguides the normie because the first layer of Fight Club is this very anti-capitalist anarcho-primitivist discourse, which is almost used in jest, I believe. Once you understand the deeper aspects of Fight Club, you realize that the criticism of the consumerist culture in this movie is essentially just a luxury that the movie can afford to attract the eyes of the normie. Now, what is this movie about? It is about a man who cannot access the reproductive line. It is about cockery. It is about cuckoldry and how a man through a kind of psychotic episode where he imagines the Chad in him. That's what Edward Norton does. He imagines a Chad inside of him. And as he combats the kind of capitalist order through his fantasy, which happens to have impacts in reality because the Chad that he imagines, he ends up enacting him. He ends up forming a revolutionary gang. um, as he combats these capitalist forces, he ends up unlocking the thing that was in his brain, the big problem that was keeping him from being a true male and access the female. And that was all of his constructions about capitalism and how he needed to fight all this. And once the big buildings in the background at the end, they fall, Edward Norton is released of this inner fictionist Chad and he becomes the Chad. He wins the woman. And so I see this entire movie as how the constructions in your mind can block you from accessing the reproductive line, and how ultimately the solution for Edward Norton was to imagine a Chad for a part of his life, but then become the Chad at the end of the movie.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a there's so much how can you saying it's like presenting a non-falsifiable theory, right? Fight Club is like one of those movies that to argue that it's not among the greats is nearly non-falsifiable. I mean, it is truly great. What I will say is there are some things in Fight Club that I want to push around the edges of, which is the psychosis aspect to it. Mm-hmm. That is, there was something about the way that the reveal that Edward Norton is Tyler Durden that troubled me. I loved the beginning, the middle, and the end, but it's like a great song that has an amazing intro, melody, verses, and chorus, but the bridge is fucked up. To me, that bridge between the Tyler Durden is the friend to he is Tyler Durden, I don't know how to process the themes of the movie quite through that. I mean, I sort of do, but I want to push on this, which is to say, is it that we all have a Tyler Durden in us, but we just don't know it? Is like, I see that as being, Tyler is sort of being more like the system than a person. And I also don't know I was very unsatisfied with the ending. This idea that he could shoot himself non-fatally, but it kills the Tyler Durden in him is inexplicable to me. I don't know if that is part and parcel to who you are. How do you kill that if you don't want it without killing yourself?
Well, you are talking to the expert of Fight Club. I've listened to this movie a few hundred times. I remember every time I was going to the university when I was doing my biological science degree, I had this little portable Palmo S device and I was listening to it every morning and every night. I was doing 2 hours of commune transport through trains and buses, and I was just rewatching it. So I believe I can give you explanations from within the structure of the movie. So the killing at the end, I don't think that the killing is essentially the destruction of a part of the brain of Edward Norton that results in the effective removal of Tyler Durden. I believe the shooting that we lost frame games. I will keep explaining for the audience. So I believe that the shooting that we see at the end of Fight Club is a symbolic shooting. I don't think that he needed to shoot a bullet in his own throat to eliminate Tyler Durden. I believe that what really makes Tyler Durden disappear is that Edward Norton has decided to get rid of him, and this is represented in the movie as him shooting a bullet in his throat in a non-fatal fashion. Hello, Frame Game, you're back?
Hey, sorry, I accidentally X'd out the window.
All right. So I will explain to you the reason why the ending can make sense. The first thing to notice is that the beginning of the movie starts with a camera inside a brain. So many people don't notice that, but Fight Club starts in a neural network. Neurons are sending electrical signal, and the camera walks back and back, and then you see the anatomy of a nose, and then you see hairs, you see the inside of a nose, and I knew that as a biologist. And so as the camera progresses, you get out of the nose of Edward Norton, you get into the mouth, and then you realize that there's a gun pointed in the mouth of Edward Norton. Now, this beginning is telling you something that you need to reinterpret the whole movie with respect to this beginning. The movie is inside the mind of Edward Norton. The events that you see happen are not true events in the physical world. Some of them may be, but you are essentially seeing the inside of the mind of a psychotic person. That's very important. So when he shoots himself, does he do it for real? Does he, and my theory is, whether he does it for real or not, it doesn't matter. What mattered, what made Tyler Durden disappear, is Edward Norton making the decision of becoming a man. And that decision was enough to chase the fictionist Chad away, and he took over this role in his life of being the Chad. To me, the shooting is symbolic. It may not have happened in reality, but even if it happened in reality, it is not because of the bullet hitting a part of the brain that erases Tyler Durden. What mattered is that Edward Norton had decided to get rid of this fictionist Chad in his head. It is marked in the movie through the bullet.
You're trying to save it. But here's the thing. I read the book. It's a beautiful book. The prose is amazing. You know what happens in the book? He shoots himself in the eyes, and the last chapter is him in heaven.
Well, it's important to know that when they made the movie, they decided to take different directions, and the author of the book said the movie did better than the book in terms of making a consistent story.
Well, I think it's also because it was beautifully told throughout that.
Yeah.
You know, I'll tell you one more thing that I'll push on. I'm still unsatisfied, but I respect the case that you're making there, which is this, the world has to burn. Like, the most productive use of their energy was to burn things down and to destroy these entire cities, not just the companies, not removing them from management, but destroying the very bricks and mortars that men built. These, a city skyline is a work of triumph of the architecture of man. And the last scene, it's funny and it's great cinema, but in terms of the moral arc of the story, that iconic line, "You met me at a very strange time in my life," with the Pixies, "Where Is My Mind," playing, and their fingers touch as they begin to hold hands, and then the world is burning. It would be one thing if they were burning themselves down, if the bad guys were burning themselves down and they were watching it, as like the New Hope. But those motherfuckers did that shit. They're the ones who burned it down. It's like, how do you remove yourself from moral accountability that you have an army now. You have thousands of people all over the country. And what are you doing with it? You're returning to this, Tyler Durden espouses the opposite of like futurism to me. He's like, get rid of all of that modern stuff. We're gonna go back to prehistoric civilization, a simpler time. I don't believe any of that. Do you?
All right, let me make this case because I truly believe this is the best movie of all time, and I'm gonna defend it with my teeth. First, yes, I'm kind of an anarcho-primitivist to some extent. I think that our brain, at least I recognize that our biological brain wants that so hard. I mean, you should see just the sex you can get by bringing a woman to the forest and allowing her to make a garden. I mean, the difference between this and a woman in the city, it will reveal to you that the human brain is made for a kind of anarcho-primitivist lifestyle. so yes, I have kind of this drive. At least you see me with cameras, and I'm on YouTube. So clearly, I'm not I'm not living the anarcho primitivist life, but I do feel that drive, and I think that this movie evokes that drive in white people, like to really be the nature's conqueror. And I really love the vision of Brad Pitt, who says, in the world I envision, there will be people will be hanging from buildings, jumping from building to building with ropes, and there will be dried meat hanging on ropes at the top of the destroyed highways. I don't remember the exact words, but essentially Brad Pitt is the anarcho-primitivist drive within the brain of Edward Norton. Now, as far as and so a lot of the a lot of the themes of this movie, they revolve around control versus anarchy, because the problem of Edward Norton at the beginning of the movie is control. He's essentially been owned by the capitalist system, where not only the capitalist system leads him to have a job and to be essentially this sterile working soldier in the greater capitalist system, but it also even plans what he wants. And you can see it when he buys furniture, and he's essentially been influenced by various magazines to buy all of the IKEA furnitures that he needs, including the Tai Chi table. And so he's essentially, his body is just a filter of control for inputs and outputs that the capitalist system has already planned for him. But that's the problem. It leads him to a non-reproductive life. It needs him to hang out with people who have literally had their balls removed, which is a metaphor for the kind of demeninization, the destruction of the male who takes control of the world to provide for a female. And so the capitalist system comes into the brain of Edward Norton as a tool of control, a tool of blockade that literally diminishes the activity of its testicles. That's essentially what this movie is telling you. The capitalist system is taking you so much as a consumer that you lose your balls. That's what this movie tells you at the beginning. Now, the whole Project Chaos is essentially a destruction of any control structure such that the state of nature can be recovered. That is the goal of this movie. Recover the state of nature by destroying any control structure. So it makes sense that the sky buildings, the skyline, are they called skyline buildings? Skyscrapers. So the skyscrapers are a representative of the soul system that falls. Now, here's the thing. My preferred theory of this movie is not that the skyscrapers actually fell. I should note, you read the book, I didn't, but I heard that in the book, the skyscrapers don't fall.
I don't recall that detail.
So I've read that it was a detail that's not. I think that the bombs don't go off for some reason in the book. That being said, let's just analyze the movie for what it is. So the skyscrapers fall on screen. But what's really falling, because you have to remember the beginning of the movie, we're inside the head of Edward Norton. What's really falling is the lock inside the brain of Edward Norton. This idea that he had convinced himself with that he could only be a victim of the capitalist system. And the skyscrapers falling is not the physical skyscrapers falling. It is the chains that Edward Norton had imposed on himself into thinking that his life had to be miserable, that he had to be a victim of all these control systems. By enacting Project Chaos and by eventually winning the woman at the end, controlling this object of chaos that Marla Singer is, which it's one of the most amazing female characters in cinema history. This kind of ball of trouble that she is. Once he starts enacting stuff into the world, outputting control over his environment, he lets go of all these chains, and now he's back to the state of nature, not so much because he destroyed the skyscrapers, but because he doesn't care about them anymore.
Okay. So there are a few things here. Yeah, and I do agree. Marla Singer is an amazing character, but I'm not convinced that he gets the girl at the end. You know, it reminds me of. Have you ever seen that amazing trilogy, Before Sunset, before was it Before Sunset, Before Sunrise? I'm sorry, Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Before Midnight. It's three movies that are paced 9 years apart in time, and they follow the man and woman, Ethan Hawke and Julie. Oh, I forget her last name. Have you seen these movies? That trilogy? Do you know what I'm
No,
talking about? It's
no, I
amazing.
didn't.
We
I heard
highly
about
recommend.
it, but yeah.
It's an extremely realistic tale of an American guy going on vacation, meeting a French girl, and they kind of spend a day together. Uh, that uh, and then the movie ends. This is Before Sunrise. The movie ends with them agreeing to see each other again, like that day next year. And then 9 years later, there's another movie, and it follows the actual actors 9 years. It's almost like a life chronological movie. And the first two, Before Sunrise and Before Sunset, are these like magically romantic uh, sort of stories of falling in love and then not following through with it. And in the intervening space of time, one of them, gets married, has a kid, is in an unhappy marriage. And finally, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, Before Midnight came out, and everyone was looking forward to it because at the end of the second one, it was like they're finally going to be together after 9 years. And what happens is, so now they're together is how Before Midnight starts, but they're arguing all the fucking time. And even though he got the girl, because it tries to be a very like hyper realistic romantic story that defies a lot of Hollywood conventions. And the thing is, you see them together, and Mark has given up his marriage. He's given up his normal family to be with this romantic French girl, and they spend the entire movie fighting. That's how I see the Martha Singer. It fades to black, but when Where Is My Mind, when the song ends, I'm not convinced that Martha Singer has cured her psychotic issues. I'm not convinced that Tyler Durden is fully dead. I don't see how, given the space of another 5 to 15 days together, they're not just arguing constantly and have to blow up more buildings to build the love back.
Well, that's a view, but there is definitely something in that scene that makes me say, okay, he got the girl. It's that Marla Singer has never been empathic. She's always been troublemaking. She's always been a source of chaos, derangement, and pain. But for the first time in the entire movie, when she sees that he has a bullet in his throat, she says, "Are you okay?" And she looks genuinely concerned. This is the first move of empathy. This is the first move of the healing female. And to me, that's a win for Edward Norton. And the way it ends with a scene that is grandiose and where the male and the female are side by side. To me, it's a classical prince kissing scene. Of course, this is a bizarre movie because this happens in the background of the credit card companies falling, and I think they wanted it that way. But I think the signs are clear enough that this is a classical and kiss movie, just in a very weird movie. Personally, I'm satisfied by it.
Sorry, do you mind if we go in on a little bit deeper? I don't know how strong the autism is. If you want to move to the next thing on this, but there are a few things I want to poke at here.
I'm not gonna run away to another movie as long as we don't solve everything in Fight Club, because I went as deep as you can go in Fight Club. I'm willing to answer all of your questions.
Okay, I give it 2 weeks with him and Marla Singer after the fade to black. You know why? Because she fell in love with the guy who fucks like Tyler Durden, and now Tyler Durden is gone.
My
Right?
poor
Like,
friend game, you didn't understand this movie. Edward Norton has now found the key to being Tyler Durden. He's understood that the fiction part in his brain is not needed, that he's that guy. He's the one who made all these great things. He's the one who organized Project Chaos.
He's got zero track record on his own. Invest if you wanted to invest in Edward Norton right now, like if you were an equity investor and you got some venture capital that you're trying to put to work, are you long on Edward Norton with his bullet hole wounds in the side of his cheek? He's got, by the way, he's going to jail for the rest of his life, right? Like,
oh my God, you are spoiling this movie with concerns like this. Are you kidding me, Friend Game?
That problem. Okay. Conan is pure. I sent you some pictures in the chat, which I want to pivot to the next point in this Conan the Barbarian versus Fight Club debate that this is turned into. Can you pull up these images on chat? Because there's an aspect of anti-consumerism in Fight Club that bothers me. And even though I like its Overton push, we need somebody out on the edge who's saying, fuck consumerism. But I don't agree with this philosophy at all. If you pull up the images that I sent you, it is of Trump's various apartments at Trump Tower and at Mar-a-Lago. And I want you to pull up those images and tell me if those images are better represented by Conan the Barbarian or by Edward Norton in Fight Club.
Frame Game, in a court of law, I would say, Your Honor, the basis for this testimony has not been determined. What the fuck are you talking about, Frame Game? Where are you going with this? You're asking me, so this is the Trump Tower. You're asking me if it makes me think of Conan or of Fight Club?
And would strive for this.
The thing is, the decor in Conan the Barbarian is closer to that because it is more grandiose, it is more classy. However, in Fight Club, there's this, but they are fighting against this. So I would represent maybe the inner skyscrapers as this in Fight Club.
Well, yeah, but that's my point. Conan gets you to strive, to work for something more. It is the embodiment of a successful life achieved, to have accumulated accomplishments, and that's manifest beauty. When I look at Fight Club, I see squalor. And now listen, there is a beautiful way that they do it, in the same way that New York City has a lot of beauty, even though it has a lot of squalor. It is a kind of dystopian, modernist, futurist, ugly, pretty, almost like an Andy Warhol type aesthetic. But the Trump aesthetic, the Conan aesthetic, is something that you can actually. It's not a thing that everyone can get, obviously, but it's something that everyone can work to. It's almost like the image of God in a way, in a religion. You can't emulate it, you can't achieve it, but it is an asymptote. To strive in life, to approach it without necessarily achieving it. The beauty is in striving for it.
Well, I mean, I think that essentially Fight Club is a more apt, it's a more apt device to show us this kind of struggle for the white man. I believe that Conan the Barbarian, or the interpretation that you present there of it, is not black-pilled enough. The white man will have to walk forward in his life with a lot more black-pilling, and I believe that Fight Club brings this black-pilling, brings the kind of shit that the world is, and the kind of ridiculous aspect of Marla Singer being the object of desire in this movie and being shit. I mean, she's a shit woman. And so essentially this whole movie is a fight against inner blackpilling into Edward Norton. And I believe it's a much more apt metaphor for the struggle of the modern man as Conan Barbarian is. Conan the Barbarian is very naive, at least in the way you present it and the way you try to attract our visual attention with these golden Trump towers. I believe that Fight Club talks to the men of the people that I was when I was watching Fight Club.
Yeah. So do you believe with these quotes? Can I read just a few of these quotes from Fight Club and just see if like a yes or no to the best of your ability and whether you agree with this?
Absolutely.
Uh,
I will still show your third photo. So you show us a picture of Baron on a lion, and then there's Melania and Trump.
that is glory. That is glory. I mean, come on. What would you rather work towards? That or, sitting up, having committed multiple acts of arson with half your face blown off and, psychotic tendencies and
I
a
guess I'm too
crack.
much of a man of a people, but your subversive attempts on me are not attracting my that much. I mean, this golden crap, I wouldn't want it in my apartment. I'm not saying if you give me that, I will take it because I will sell it. But man, I will sell these golden shit columns to just have more money and go into the wild and just build a bigger garden. I don't give a shit about these lion representations and these golden chairs.
Ride the
This is
lion.
not talking to me.
How happy would you be just riding on the lion? I mean, I would love to. I'd love to
I
take a ride.
wouldn't give a shit about this lion, to be honest. I would care more about a little device, a little toy that the children can develop his motor skills on. This is a fucking couch in the shape of a lion. All he can do on it is sit.
It's more like a love was it like a love chair or something. But all right, here's a quote: "We're consumers. We are byproducts of a lifestyle obsession. Murder, crime, poverty. These things don't concern me. What concerns me are celebrity magazines, television with 500 channels, some guy's name on my underwear." Yes or no? Do you agree with that? Does that capture your worldview?
No, I don't agree, but it was raised as a kind of sarcastic observation in the movie. So it was not first degree. He was laughing about this lifestyle.
I agree. It's hyperbole, but what I see in Fight Club is a kind of indulgence in nihilism that doesn't let you scale a society. So murder, crime, poverty, these things don't concern me. I would say that that is not just a joke in Fight Club. The house that they have on Paper Street, they don't maintain the upkeep on that. The whole house is underwater half the time. Everything's falling apart, and they are not maintaining it. When I think about the kind of Trumpian revolution and the sort of middle class revolution, I see it because there is this high-low coalition against the middle class, but the middle class is they're good people who are maintaining their homes. They're trying to wealth is something that you accumulate, and they're making the effort to do it. They haven't dropped out. They haven't given up, and they aren't wallowing in the nihilism. Do you think that that murder, crime, and poverty are things that concern the Tyler Durden, Edward Norton types,
The
or
thing
no?
is, you're the first person I ever see analyze this Paper Street house scene as, oh no, they're not keeping good care of their homes. They are telling you, we're a generation of men raised by women. Is finding another woman really the solution for our problem? They're at the bottom of the barrel. They are the shit of the. You are the shit of this world, waiting to serve, or something like this. And this whole movie tells you we are at the bottom of the barrel. Our fathers have left us. God was made to the image of our Father. What does that tell you about God? And the worst thing you can possibly think is probably the case, which is that God exists, but he doesn't give a shit about you. And you're telling me about concerns that affect the middle class. These guys are at the bottom of the barrel in terms of their access to the female reproductive line. They
But
didn't even have a father. You're telling me that their couch isn't clean and that there's water in the basement? Of course, this is all meant to show you this is the bottom of society.
How can you get lower than Conan was?
Conan.
Conan the
Well,
Barbarian, feel of pain. He was
well,
less than well, no job. He'd
Well,
have a cushy.
this is the beauty of Fight Club, is that with less violence than Conan, because their mother didn't get killed, their father didn't get killed. It's the amazing aspect of Fight Club. It is a post Conan movie in the sense that they succeed at making two people more miserable. Well, not just two, all of the guys in Project Chaos in some way. These guys are more miserable than Conan, because Conan had a sense in his life he was along a reproductive line and he had to avenge and to continue the reproductive line. These guys are essentially held as evolutionary dead ends. They're like the incels, if you will. That's why we start this whole movie with balls being cut. He's among a bunch of guys who don't have testicles, literally. And so these people are evolutionary dead ends. They have no hope in doing anything else than destroy the systems that are keeping them in that state.
Okay, well, I'm pretty satisfied with. I don't know if you want to. I think that we've done a good job of going deep on this. I think I'll leave it to your judgment about whether we want to move on to the worst movies. But I think that we've actually painted. I almost can't find movies that are farther apart in terms of their polarity. The more I think about it, between the sort of you had a quote right now where you said that Fight Club is in a post Conan world, and I guess my whole point is that I think that American men, Western men, need to them in ways that are large and small. But that would be sort of my closing statement on it. And I think it's a good guide to tap into your ancestors in a spiritual way, to know what mindset you need to conquer in your own little way.
All right. Now we have other movies that we won't go as deep as we did in Fight Club, but I'd like to mention these movies because people are going to be pissed anyway if we don't go through many movies that could constitute the best movies, and then we're going to give you the straw poll link. So quickly, but we can go as deep as you feel the need to. Frame games. Memento. To me, it's an important movie. It's very cheap. It could have been made so much better. But it is an important movie in that it deconstructs one of the main aspects of any movie, which is suspense and progression of story. It completely deconstructs this using only one fair assumption, the assumption that this person has brain damage so that he cannot remember, which allows the makers of the movie to tell the story backward, and you still can follow a kind of suspense, but it's a suspense about what happened in the past rather than what happened in the future.
Yeah, I was very thoroughly entertained by Memento. And one of the things that I think gives it modern relevance is the theme of self-deception. Now, it's framed in Memento through this sort of this plot tool of a memory impairment. But there actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there were moments in the film where he was sort of self-aware of his. Let me know if I'm misremembering that, but I thought at the end he sort of became aware of, like, the last scene, if I recall correctly, is him being sort of aware that he has this memory impairment and planting a device or something so that he would remember something in a way that would make it good for him later on.
So here's the structure of this movie. This guy understands that he has a memory impairment. That's why he uses tattooing on his own body to remember whatever is concluded as being the truth. So he marks as his investigation progress to find who killed his wife. He notes the facts that he understands properly on his arm, and he tattoos other information that he feels are relevant on his body. Now, from my remembering of the movie, the plot twist in all this is that essentially he chooses at the very end, which is the beginning chronologically, at the very end of this movie, we see him essentially choosing to self-deceive. He knows that it's not this guy who killed his wife, but he chooses to note on his arm that it is him. Not because he killed his wife, but because he knows that he's going to be so pissed that he's going to pursue the vengeance to avenge his wife. And he also knows that this guy is a bad man because he's been exploiting him for many years. And so he decides to self-deceive into the belief that the guy to be killed, the guy who killed his wife, is the guy with the glasses. I don't remember his name, but it's essentially an act of conscious self-deception, which he can afford because he won't remember that he self-deceived about it.
Yes, which brings me to something that is a topic I think is not given enough a thorough understanding, which is the Robert Trivers theory of self-deception. So Robert Trivers is this very famous evolutionary psychologist who published a treatise on self-deception. He's done a lot of work in this space, where he posits that self-deception is not some big act that you do every once in a while, that you're doing it constantly. And here I think this is a direct quote. He says this, and this is the thrust of the sort of evolutionary foundation of self-deception, Tim. He says, I believe that self-deception evolves in the service of deceit. That is, the major function of self-deception is to better deceive others, both to make it harder for others to detect your deception and also allow you to deceive with less immediate cognitive cost. So if I'm lying to you now about something you actually care about, you might pay attention to my shifty eyes if I'm consciously lying, or the quality of my voice, or some other behavioral cue that's associated with the conscious knowledge of deception and nervousness of being detected. But if I'm unaware of the fact that I'm lying to you, those avenues of detection will be unavailable. So basically, his work is to say that people are constantly lying to themselves about little things to make themselves better persuaders to others. And I think that the movie does a good job of building an entire storyline around that very, very culturally relevant psychological phenomenon, which I think happens all the time, particularly in issues of identity and identity politics. That people are constantly self-deceiving themselves to avoid an empirical review of facts and statistical and scientific knowledge that we have, accumulated, and to avoiding debate and just self-deceiving yourself, self-deceiving to be able to better deal with a world that will punish you ruthlessly if you were to betray some tell that you believed in wrongthink.
Absolutely. I believe that Robert Trivers' theory is correct. I believe it is a little narrow. I believe that there's even more to it than just deceiving others. I believe that any reconstruction we do in our brain is essentially a self-deception about the universe. When we reconstruct the space around us and we have concepts like squares, circles, they're not really in the world around us. They are psychological constructs in our brain, and the world around us is just made of pixels and atoms, but we reconstruct it as a meaningful reality. And I think this self-deception starts there. And then, yes, in the social sphere, it serves deception among other things. In other words, there are certain informations in the world, especially in the social world, because the social world is a world of fiction. So whether you are a popular guy in high school or not, it's all a big fiction because it doesn't exist in the real world. It's all created by the brains around you and by your own brains. And so I believe that the social domain is one particular domain in which self-deception can be advantageous because you can self-deceive into thinking that you are the popular quarterback, and it might give you confidence and help you reach a woman that you wouldn't have reached otherwise. So Memento is a great movie for having these two elements, the study of a suspense with while knowing the future. So how can a suspense be maintained about the past, and the theme of self-deception? For this, it deserves to be among the greatest movies, but I don't think the greatest movie. Let's talk about American History X.
Mm.
American History X is a movie that succeeds at making a narrative where someone is justified in their beliefs about other groups. It is a story that succeeds at making Edward Norton, again, Edward Norton, Derek, a legitimate hero in the sense that he's always the victim of violence throughout. He's merely responding to violence. And the narrative, although it does, as I described in my full video about it, it does give some hooks to the leftist, because there's a fake arc of redemption where Derek becomes non-racist. But because it ends with Derek's brother being killed, this movie is essentially telling you Derek was justified in seeking self-defense against the racial violence he was the victim of. And to that extent, I give it a place among the most important movies, one that frames the issue of racial violence in a way that even the white response to that is seen as legitimate.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting film, and there are some, in particular, there are some scenes that I thought were particularly well done. You know, there is the famous dinner scene, and that where before going to jail, Edward Norton's character is having a argument with his liberal sister, his neutral mother, and I believe their Jewish stepfather. And
Absolutely. Well, a
and
kind of new boyfriend of the mother.
oh yeah, yeah, that's right. And it's just very, very interesting, and it has this intensity and honesty that is very rare. That is, both sides are making the arguments that you would expect them to make, but it's very cogent in a way that I think has never been presented on film ever before and ever after. And I think scenes like that are very interesting and powerful. I This is again another movie where the ending really bothered me. Like
Well, let me take you to the psychologist couch and fix your view of the ending of this movie, just like I tried doing with Fight Club.
go please educate me, JF.
What's the problem with the end of the movie, Frame Game?
Well, the problem is, the way the last how a movie ends is the deciding variable for what the moral takeaway of the film is. And it's like whenever you read a news article, you can always skip to the last line to figure out what they want you to leave, what impression they want you to leave with. And that's why it's very important when you are publishing cultural works that the arc ends in the right place. And the way that I saw, so the ending of that film, as I recall, was his younger brother being violently and randomly murdered in a bathroom as a white kid by a black kid, like in school, and
Yep.
just Derek's character just being totally broken up and in tears about it. Is
Yep.
that correct?
Absolutely.
So is the moral arc that you have to pay for things you did like wrong in the past, even if you've like renounced them? What's the moral arc there?
That's the red herring arc in my interpretation of the movie. So it's a hook sent to leftists, which will interpret it that way. But there are clear clues in the movie about where the filmmaker is trying to bring us there. So it is not that kind of arc. It is not a payment after the wrong has been done. What's happening is and the key to understanding the ending happens very close to the end, where the black school professor or the director of the school goes into the jail to talk to Derek. And essentially, you have the facing of these two men, and it's essentially black nationalism versus white nationalism at that point in that conversation. So the guy, the black man, says to Derek, I was just like you when I was young. I was putting everything in the responsibility of other. I was accusing society. I was accusing others until I realized one thing. And now he lays out his view of a utilitarian ethics. So he says, let me ask you something, Derek. What have you done that has improved your life? So he's clearly laying out for the first time in front of Derek a view of utilitarian ethics. In other words, okay, you can be pissed off about these wrongs and these other wrongs, but think about, did you improve your life? And he seeds the seed of utilitarian ethics into Derek's head. Now Derek will swallow it. And we will see, just after this scene, we will see a flashback of Derek with his father telling him, never listen to Principal Sweeney. Whatever this guy tells you is bullshit. And he says a word, he says something bullshit. I will not repeat the word here. And so essentially what this movie is telling you is the pacification that was proper for the black nationalist, because the black nationalist was putting all of his fault to slavery and to past actions and to the world around him. Essentially, this movie is, that's why it's a woke movie. It tells you that strategy was good for Principal Sweeney. It got him to become a better man, to stop accusing the people around him. But it wasn't good for Derek. In other words, the appeasement of the black nationalist is the proper response to his problems, so that he can take his life in his own hands and stop being the victim, start realizing that he is an actor in the world and that he can improve his life. Now, when that solution from the black nationalist is given to Derek, he's essentially fooled into appeasing, when appeasing is not the proper solution when you are the victim of racial violence. So this movie, as woke as it is telling you appeasement is a solution for black nationalists, and taking matters into their own hand, that's an appeasement for the black people and the black nationalists. But if the white nationalists do it, all they will do is become the victim of more violence, more crime, more racial hate.
Yeah, so I mean, I have a few things on there. I mean, you and I have different views, obviously, on a number of things. Like, I don't identify as a white nationalist, obviously, but I have, there's aspects that we obviously agree on with any number of things, including identity politics for everyone or for no one. But what I would say is, I just don't see it that way, because there's in the climate around which identity issues are discussed and used as political footballs. One of the things you learn in law school is that one of the legal justifications for affirmative action is the correction of historical injustices. And this, it's a pretty incredible thing that you're told, on the one hand, that to abide by the Martin Luther King precept, judgment by content of color of character, not color of skin, and at the same time that you have this state-sanctioned racial discrimination. Take a second seat. You're a second-class citizen because your forefathers, the sins of the father, are imposed on you. And so you need to be okay with taking a backseat to pay for things that, your father did, or in this movie, as I see it, your older brother did. The moral theme that I see in the ending is that this kid it's sort of moralizing and normalizing the SJW justification for racial affirmative action programs now because of things that your older brother did in the past. So if you have to suffer, or if your family has to suffer for something that your ancestors did, well, that's sad, but you kind of had it coming. Do you not see that in American History X?
The thing is, it's a super complex movie in terms of its writing and making, and there were various interests about what the movie would become. And what you mentioned there is true. It transpires still in the final version of the movie. But one of the makers of this movie, who most influenced the movie by trying to make Derek and his little brother the least racist possible. So this guy really wanted to turn Edward Norton into a proper hero. He didn't succeed at doing it in the end fully, but he did succeed a little bit. And so this tells me that there was an early version of the movie in which your interpretation is exactly what was intended. But when this guy and Edward Norton started editing the movie to their taste, and really that's when the movie became a movie about neo-Nazis. Because originally it was a movie about drugs just being traded by gangs of that happen to be neo-Nazi. But the main theme of neo-Nazi come from this filmmaker and Edward Norton working on a second and third version of this movie and then being cut by the company. There was essentially a conflict between the editing team and the company that had already purchased the movie. As they were trying to make it more on my side of the interpretation. So I don't deny that the final movie may be interpreted in the way you say it, but I know that someone, including Edward Norton and one of the filmmakers involved, tried not to go there, but they couldn't finish the job.
Yeah, no, to me, the fact that I don't think the audience leaves feeling a tremendous amount of that an injustice was really committed with this young high school kid being randomly and ruthlessly shot in a bathroom stall. The fact that you don't leave the movie thinking that that's really a crime and a bad thing. That I think that is that the way that they constructed the arc. That to me really takes a lot of the wind out of the sails to the movie to me. But I think reasonable minds can disagree, and I think you've presented a lot of the interesting cinematic aspects of the movie.
I think I've when I listened to it as a young man and I had no like political priors to it, I think I welcomed that ending scene very neutrally. I was like, okay, this is bizarre. It's heartbreaking, but I don't know that I had constructed either that it was fair or unfair. To me, it was just hitting me with a brick of reality. And I still see it that way a little bit. It's essentially, this movie is telling us racial violence against white is the reality you have to deal with. And appeasing yourself and the solution is not in your own mind. You're getting murdered by a violent minority that hates you. That's how I see it today. I would also note that there is a narration of the little brother of Derek at the end after he's been killed. And the narration comes from him writing his own work just before dying. And in his own work, he has this appeasement because he quotes Abraham Lincoln. And I will note that Abraham Lincoln has also been assassinated, not in as far as I know, not in a racially relevant way, but I don't know the history. But the point is, Abraham Lincoln, before dying, had written peaceful words and words of welcoming and peace, and he got killed. And the little brother of Derek had written words of peace and words of appeasement versus minority, and he got killed by minorities. I think that this is a very important aspect.
Yeah, it's just, we're living in a world now where everyone that the left-wing authoritarians don't like is a Nazi. Trump's a Nazi. McCain is a Nazi if he had any, if he hadn't gone against Trump, right? I mean, Bush was a Nazi. Now everybody, in the basket of deplorables is a Nazi. So someone in the chat had a comment that said those Nazis had it coming. And I can't help but think that that's kind of that's kind of a huge part of the moral capture. You know, you had it coming for flirting with this stuff. Even if then there's no redemption, there's no way out. So don't, you know, don't get involved. And because Nazism is a, you know, it's just a slur word now. I don't think Nazism even exists really. I think, you know, it's just a proxy for any sort of you know, counter identitarian movement, counter SJW identitarian movement, or even just much broader than that. So, you know, I just feel like this film really normalizes uh, murder and violence against those damn Nazis who had it coming. I don't know. That's the impression I'm left with.
Yeah, and people point on the chat, it's been directed by a Jewish director. I know it's a hard step to take, but I invite people to go watch my analysis of this with Borzoi. It's on my channel. And essentially my conclusion is, yes, it's been directed by a Jewish director. Yes, he's been, of course, projecting his own mind onto this movie. But ultimately, what I think that this guy was trying to do is he was really trying to understand white nationalism and really trying to give a fair hearing as much as his mind could allow him to do. He wanted to be so edgy. He said, I'm going to make a movie where the Nazis are good. I think that's the state of mind in which he approached that movie. I know it's a hard pill to swallow, but there are several signs in the way he intervened into the production that gives me this belief. I think that's it for American History X. Maybe we can go fast over Matrix 1.
Yes. Okay. So this is my pick. I try to sort of be humorous and say that pick for best movie ever is Matrix 1 and worst movie ever is Matrix 2. But I do think that the worst movie ever was actually the 2016 film Zootopia, which we'll get to later. But let me I'll go through best movie for Matrix 1 and my case for it, which is that top to bottom, it is probably the movie with the greatest direct parallel to people who hold opinions for which political opinions for which they are persecuted. In the modern era, there is really nothing close to The Matrix that tells you the story of a normal guy who starts out the movie as a kind of hacker, which I think is sort of a proxy for all of the meme magicians on the internet, those Russian bots hacking elections through memes about Trump and frogs, with who don't really know the full story, but they have an inkling that something's up, something's wrong. The world isn't really what you're told it is, and you are in this kind of half existence where you have one foot in the modern world. You have a job, you go there every day, you know, you're sort of doing your 9 to 5 in your everyman corporation. You got a boss that you don't like, but you know, you wear your suit and you're doing okay. But the other half of your life, and the more meaningful half of your life, is the one spent on your computer hacking the system to find the deeper truth of it all. And that story of going from that to breaking through to a moment of truth where you sort of arrive at a point in life where you need to make a decision. Do I really want to know? Which brings us to the self-deception question.
Yeah.
The Robert Trivers self-deception hypothesis is very relevant to the Matrix discussion, which is, do you want to take the blue pill? Do you want to do the memento thing where you put the wrong tattoo on your body because you know that life would be better with not knowing it. You know, ignorance is bliss, and I think that many of the normies who are on the normie path have seen out of the corner of their eye, in their peripheral vision, that something is not right with the world. They have followed a little bit of the white rabbit, and they have self-deceived to say, you know what, this would fuck up all my shit. This would fuck up my job. It would fuck up my relationships. I would fuck up everything in my life would be changed if I took the red pill. And the other thing is, You can never go back. And that story, and then life on the Nebuchadnezzar, the struggle of it, the barrenness of it. There's no glitz or glamour. The scarcity of that life. The Sentinels themselves are that's exactly what internet censorship is. These guys are out there. All the censors are out there all the time. The media matters. The BuzzFeeds, the Washington Post, the media, the community organizers, the activists. Every single thing lines up with it, and yet there is that matrix-like quality that through meme magic you can actually kind of, there is no spoon. You can actually meme Trump into the president. You can actually make things like Brexit happen, controlling none of the institutions. So I can keep going on this, but I'll pause to let you get in.
Yeah, so Matrix, it's so disappointing as a movie because it had so much potential. I think it's the most heartbreaking movie in terms of the difference between the actual movie and its potential. Now, there are good things about Matrix. The introduction of the infinite cavernous metaphor of was it Aristotle, this idea of embedded universes, that is absolutely beautiful, and there's so much potential. The red pill and blue pill decision, that is wonderful. That being said, the movie turns into, just like District 9, to me, it's a movie that had lots of potential, but it turns into an action movie essentially. And the depth of the philosophical question at the heart of all of this is poorly explored. And so that's what I have to say about Matrix. It's unfortunately turned into an action movie. In fact, that's what Matrix 2 is about. It's essentially just an action movie with lots of copies of the freaking agent. And the way the agents and the way the communication between the inner Matrix and the outside world is operated, there's lots of flaws in this. The way he can practice, and it's, you ask yourself, well, if they are in a virtual world, why does he need to practice? If the Matrix is really controlled by an outside force, how can it, if it's omniscient, how can it not know that there's an agent of revolution within the Matrix? These questions remain unanswered in my view, and because to the extent that you can emulate an entire world, I don't see how you could not know that Neo is in that world and that there's all sorts of people like the Prophet who are willing to help Neo. And so I'm unfortunately, I do have to reject this movie as one of the best movies. It's in fact one of the saddest movies because it didn't exploit the potential of a great idea. It ruined it forever.
Can I present a rebuttal of those points that you articulated? Okay. So first is I think that the fight scenes were actually not just amazing and well ahead of their time, something that subsequent movies have all copied from or been colored by. It was truly revolutionary the way they filmed it. But it served a philosophical role as well, that the way in which we can fight does not have to be relegated to the normal laws of physics that existed by what they told us we had to do in the Matrix. We don't have to follow Daddy's rule book, the boomer rule book on how to fight. We can make our own reality. And that is what the revolution of 2015 and 2016 set in motion. Fighting in that way that is not subject to the normal set of Hollywood, of physics. It is a kind of magic, a kind of faith that you can make your own rules. And what I would say with respect to practicing is that to me that symbolized that those training sequences symbolized that it is a mental muscle, that to be able to fight better in the Matrix is something that you can mentally practice, and that you hone your meme magic powers through dedicated and consistent practice, through making the memes and tracking the reach and working harder, and it's something that you can control through doing more of it. I'm noticing a theme that movies with action sequences are nixed from the JF all time list. I think that the quintessential JF movie would be a 90-minute philosophy lecture
Yeah,
with,
I'm
with
French. No, I
no,
mean
but
I'm
yeah.
open to action scenes, but they need to be philosophically justified. So introducing an action scene that Papa JF will accept is like it's a very sensitive thing to do.
Well, okay, I'll give you. Let's just track one particular fight scene that I thought was a great example of my point that these are not just fights for the purpose of like wowing the 85 IQ crowd. The fight where Neo is underground and he has a choice whether to run like everyone before him or to fight when no one else had ever won against any agent. That to me is like someone in our causes in the sort of you know new right fight against SJWs. We're standing here having seen our older brothers been killed. Any of our older brothers who have fought against the SJWs have been killed. All of our fathers who fought against them were killed. All of our grandfathers, they all lost. And whether it was you track it back to I almost see the sort of gamer revolution as being sort of the first time that there was an effective pushback against SJWs in my lifetime. But then obviously Trump was sort of the Trump moment where we stood our ground and everyone was saying, run, run, go with Cruz, go with Rubio, run, run. You can't win. And having that moment where it's like, we're going to take the bet, even if we're going to have to pay for it afterwards. Because if you remember, backing Trump publicly wasn't a normal thing. If Trump had lost, you would have suffered consequences when the war was over and Hillary was one. It would have been your head on a pike if you had published something publicly. Employers would have seen that, in a Google search of you. Oh, this person supports Trump. They wrote a blog article supporting Trump. He's a racist, sexist, misogynist, transphobe, Islamophobe. Parade of commas. Everyone was saying, run, don't do it. But that scene, it had all of the aesthetics of like a dirty, hairy, Wild West saloon, right? The dirt and grime of New York City is like wisping in the wind as they face off against one another. And you've still never seen Neo fight yet. You've seen him train, you've seen him fail. And they fight, and it is this fight that has this like totally cartoon physics, and everyone is watching it happen in real time, and they're shocked, like, "Oh my God, he actually has this power in him that the Matrix was telling him he couldn't have." And then at the end of that fight, Agent Smith has him in a headlock, and the train is coming in, and he says that iconic line, right? Do you hear that, Mr. Anderson? Calling him by his real world name, not his internet handle, Neo. I mean, it's literally his internet avatar is what Neo is. And he says, "Do you hear that, Mr. Anderson? That is the sound of inevitability." And
So
and what does he
cheesy.
say? And what does he say in response to that? He says, "My name is Neo." He says, "I'm not the person you say I am in the Matrix. My name is Neo. I make my own damn rules." And then the fight scene concludes with him knocking him out, getting hit by the train, and continuing on with his mission.
So
I think that's beautiful. Yeah.
Robert is saying, sending a super chat saying, read the fucking super chat. We will read the super chats, but we just wanted to go through the important examples. Well, you make a good case. I mean, this movie was for geeks. And it was at a time, I don't remember the year exactly, but it was at a time where computers had emerged, where I remember we were geeks. We had computers at the time. I believe the internet had been up for a few years. And so, yeah, it totally makes sense. And I accept your defense of it.
Okay. All right. Very well. Do
All right.
you need to read the Fuking super chats?
Before we jump to the super chats, a lot of people have been requesting. I didn't have it on my list, but let's talk about it. Lord of the Rings is being brought by the chat. Man, this is heartbreaking that I do not necessarily feel the need to introduce Lord of the Rings on my top list. And it's not that it's not a top movie. It is. It is one of the best movie ever produced. It's like a freaking symphony of perfect music. But that's all they could do essentially. I mean, I love the Bilbo the Hobbit movie, the Bilbo the Hobbit books and the Lord of the Ring books. I was a fan of these books before they made movies about it, and I was satisfied with the movies. They are some of the greatest human creations ever. But it's like a classical symphony where you're not really, it's just too beautiful. And they had to make everything perfect, and they did everything perfect. But that's as good as Lord of the Ring could be. I mean, congratulations to the team, to the filmmaker. They acted perfect, but sometimes this perfection is kind of annoying me inside. And it reminds movies that are complex, but they don't really evoke this kind of, oh, I found a movie that's so unique. They don't evoke what Fight Club evokes in me, because they don't tell me that much about society. They just reproduce one of the most beautiful stories ever written, and they put it into one of the best movies ever produced, but it doesn't awaken my inner male, you know?
Okay, wait a second. Your complaint about Lord of the Rings is that it's essentially a Persian rug, something that is it's too perfect, and so an imperfection needs to be inserted into it in order for it to be like sold commercially.
Well, it's no,
That's
no, no. I mean, yeah, yes, in a sense. I mean, I respect this movie. I'm not saying you should add imperfection. I'm saying when a filmmaker makes Fight Club, he succeeds in 2 hours at telling me something so much more fundamental than what the entire Lord of the Rings series can tell me. Although it is a beautiful series, and Smeagol is absolutely one of the most impressive characters in cinema history. And so I'm sending as much flowers as you want to the movie, but it doesn't grab me inside of me.
wait. Okay, I think this is a case where I have the exact geometric to the degree 180 degrees the other way. I think that everything is wrong with the Lord of the Rings, but only one thing is good, which is New Zealand.
New Zealand? The
Yeah,
beauty of the landscape?
yeah.
What's wrong with
Change
LOTR?
my mind. Okay, so I saw Lord of the Rings as almost unwatchable, the first two. I remember it was such a cultural phenomenon that I had to watch all three. It was like you couldn't be a part of the cultural conversation in, like, I don't know, high school or middle school or whenever, or college. I don't remember exactly when it came out, but I remember it was like forced watching. But I remember kind of like falling asleep during the first two, and then having like an 85 IQ titillation at the vast scale of the fight scenes in the third. But from what I remember of the first two, is it was kind of like watching someone walk for like 6 hours.
Well,
They were just walking.
personally, I was involved in the story. The story really catched my attention. It didn't catch my heart, but it catched my attention. Personally, with the dwarves and the human societies, there's really this, essentially, as someone was pointing in the chat, LOTR is a bunch of ethnostates collaborating sometimes and making wars other times. And there are some deep storylines in there, such as how the humans are betraying themselves ultimately. And the hobbits, they represent the pure goodness, you know, and somehow the pure goodness is what's needed to carry the ring. And the elves are representing kind of accumulated knowledge. The elves are kind of the keepers of knowledge in that society. So, and to me, this really pulled my attention, and that's why I loved these movies. It didn't pull my kind of French brain that wants really something revolutionary, but I'm pretty satisfied as a suspense an epic story movie, personally, I'm very satisfied.
I see a direct analogy between the Lord of the Rings movies and what I think was a sort of happening cinematically at the time was this trend towards Star Wars prequel type movies. Tons and tons of CGI, uh, visually aesthetic in the way that like plastic porn is. Like there's no real human. Like it's missing that layer. I think what you're detecting as perfection, I see as plastic. Like there is, when you have a character that you relate to, that you identify with, and their struggle is your struggle. And when you're dealing with a problem in life, you think, okay, how did Neo handle it? How did Conan handle it? How did Tyler Durden handle it? Right? Who was it? I think it was. I don't think it was Trump. Someone I read a book by by someone who said that like he has like a council of elders every week that he meets with in his mind, which is like the 12 great men of history. And when all of the problems in life, he consults on a weekly basis in his mind, like a round table of like what those 12 great men of history would have said. Like what would have Abe Lincoln said about this? What would have Donald Trump or whoever yours are? And I don't know. I can't imagine saying to myself, what would Aragorn, how would Aragorn have dealt with this problem? And part of that is because you do need imperfections in characters in order for them to have a redemption arc. Have you read Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces about the
No.
hero's journey? It's an amazing book that basically it describes the 3-act play structure. That every hero's journey has a uh, has the same basic structure and just a different sort of melody. But tonal music, cinematically, so to speak, works as follows. You start with the hero before he's a hero. He's an ordinary guy, and then this is Act One, and then he's an ordinary world, and then there is a moment where he has the opportunity to go to extraordinary world, and in extraordinary world, that is where he will be on his quest, and it will be high risk, high reward. If he wins, his life is, he has achieved this great mission, everything, all these problems that he had before will be solved. And if he loses everything, and he's worse off than he was before. And then, so there is this, I forget, not call to action, but I don't know, we'll call it call to action. And then there is a period where he struggles with whether or not to take the call, with whether to adhere it. And then he accepts it, and Act One ends with him accepting it and taking his first steps on the hero's journey. Act Two is him going through what are called, I think, the round of trials, achieving a fair amount of success, even though it's nonlinear, and then having a critical battle that he loses and falls into what's called the long, dark night of the soul. And that's always the end of Act Two. Act Three is the redemption arc of going from the long, dark night of the soul into a meeting again with the battle that he lost the first time, winning it this time, and now bringing the whole thing full circle to having achieved the problem that he had before he accepted like the call to greatness. And you see that with Conan the Barbarian. You see that with Fight Club. Edward Norton had he had no meaning. He had that IKEA existence, and now he's solved ostensibly his psychological problems. He has meaning. He's the tribe leader, not just another cog in the wheel. You see that with the Matrix, with Neo. I don't see that with Lord of the Rings. I see these safe, plastic, one-dimensional characters who are basically just mobile transport for a magical artifact. Like, what's the hero's journey there?
Well, it's important to remember that this was written by Tolkien, and so the job of the filmmaker, given the huge book that this represented, the books actually that this represented, he couldn't introduce things that would violate the book. His job was a representative one. Now, the structure of discourse of Tolkien may not be modern. It's old enough that he may not have had all the tricks of modern cinema and modern story writing. But Tolkien, the way he was writing, it was not so much in the events that were unfolding that redemption arcs were developed. Tolkien is more a descriptive style. What's beautiful about Tolkien is the universe that is created. These various ethnicities, these various types of being in his stories, they just play out their own character. And so there's not that much of an evolution in the characters in Tolkien. It's more that they play out. It's more that if there is an evolution to be had, it will be impersonated by two different characters coming from two different races. So Tolkien structures the evolution of his stories around the base character that is unchangeable of his protagonist.
Mm. Yeah, well, I would say that I agree with you there. I didn't read the books, but I remember as a kid flipping through some comics of Lord of the Rings and being really fascinated with exactly what you're talking about. I have no qualms with the literature. It's the movie translation that bothered me. I thought that at least the cartoons that I saw of it and the whole universe, which the modern day version of that, of course, is Game of Thrones, this kind of totally expansive fantasy universe with all different tribes, and they all have their own characteristics, and you're sort of a fly on the wall of these heroes as they're going from kingdom to kingdom, navigating some grand universal struggle between good and evil. I totally appreciate that. It's the cinematic translation, I thought, didn't leave me with any. I don't know how my life got better. I don't know that there's no one that I can personally, that I would put on my counsel, so to speak. And I would only say that from the aesthetic perspective, I was impressed by Lord of the Rings' revolutionary scale. That is, there's a great quote. I don't know if it was Einstein, but it was somebody, some physicist in that sort of sphere, who said something about like awe and how scale and awe are related. Awe gives you serenity and perspective on life. And it doesn't matter how you get the awe, whether or not you're next to a giant canyon or a mountain or a body of water or a storm of enormous intensity or a large skyscraper. There's something about scale that dwarfs you, that makes you feel the perspective of the cosmos, something much bigger than yourself, which is a semi sort of religious experience. So when I said the good thing about Lord of the Rings was New Zealand, was it really gave me an appreciation for how pretty New Zealand is.
All right, wonderful. So let's quickly read the super chats. Then we'll just mention two movies very quick, and then we'll get the vote from the public. So get ready to vote on the movies we talked about. Robert sends $20. He says, Jesus Christ, JF, take a day off. And then he sends another super chat which says, never mind, I like where you're going. There's no such thing as a day off in Papa JF's life. Robert says, Frames is whiter than me. He finds the words I've never heard. Intergalactic Lebensron says, hey, Frame Game, would it be possible for you to put your sources and folders up as an open resource? That would be much appreciated. We try to do it with most episodes, but it's a complicated work, and so it's gonna take some time. Secret Genius says Conan is the carrot, Fight Club is the stick. Shokobuchu sends $10. He says watching JF defend Fight Club is like me defending the anime Evangelion. The characters are supposed to be terrible people. They are redemption stories. Robert says, Frames, I wish sometimes I were Jewish. My own people hate me for loving them. Ellie Reed says, what do you think of the films Mulholland Drive and Starry Eyes? Mulholland Drive, I've watched it because it's often a recommended cinephile movie. I don't remember much of it, but I don't remember being fascinated by it.
I actually haven't seen those movies. I don't think.
All right. Ragnar Odinson says Conan is epic, but in the way it presents masculinity. However, the way that Frame Game presents it makes me understand why Jared Kushner married Ivanka Trump. Intergalactic Lebensraum says, I just tuning in right now, but did you guys hear about the new book the author of Fight Club wrote, which is about a guy in a post-American ethno-state? Yeah, that's an important note about Fight Club. The guy who wrote Fight Club has now written a book in a post-American white ethno-state society.
Yeah, out of interest, I saw that actually a while ago, and I actually downloaded it on Audible. And when I get through it, I haven't started yet. I've got another thing in the queue, but when I get to it, I'm going to try to do like a stream deconstruction on it. Mostly because I actually think just Chuck Palahniuk is such an incredible writer. He has he is a Hemingway like ruthless honesty, which I think was faithfully done. One of the things about Fight Club that makes it so revolutionary is it pulls no punches, and that really comes from Chuck's writing. I just want to comment quickly on one of the Streamlabs that said, Jesus Christ, JF, take a day off, and then never mind. JF, whether he likes it or not, whether I think JF is participating in self-deception by counter-signaling Conan the Barbarian. He is Conan the Barbarian. Always the discipline of the steel.
Oh, that I am disciplined. I mean, you should have seen me when I was a monkey brain surgeon. I would wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning to go start a 7-hour surgery. And then 7 hours, and then I was running an experiment for 5 hours, and I was not sleeping just to stay aside the monkey. This dates back in my life very far. I've started my studies. I was working 40 hours a week at night. I was working from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and then going to school for 8 hours. There was essentially 16 hours of work in my day, and I was sleeping sometimes 2 or 3 hours. And so it's been like this all my life. I really see my life as like a burning candle, like Elton John, like the candle in the wind. And I wanna live the most out of it, and I know that living the most out of it, sometimes people will be driven to like take drugs, and living the most out of it, they're just going to lay on a couch and enjoy life. To me, living the most of life is organizing it so that you can produce output that is valuable for the world. And that's what I'm doing. In fact, my book has been now sent to last review. And I think this will be one of my great realization, which will survive my body. The Revolutionary Phenotype, we're about a month or two away from having a final written version. The editor has it in their hand, and they are working on that.
I think deep down, JF, you're not really a nihilist. I think that you play a nihilist on TV. To have that fire burning, it's all right. Well, I won't armchair psychologize.
No, I mean, it's people think that nihilism constrain you to a world of desperation, and most nihilists and most existentialists were depressed. But that's not my case. I'm a nihilist. I look at the universe in the face, but I'm a nihilist with the Albert Camus revolt fire burning inside of him. So,
can I make a quick comment on that?
Yeah.
So I started this like Sunday game night thing just to kind of socialize and stream, and I was taking polls on what people wanted to play, and someone recommended Civilization. So I downloaded Civilization and I played a game. And what's really interesting is every civilization starts out with like a list of special attributes unique to them. Like Rome has like more culture, and like the Aztecs have like an early game advantage or something. I think that the French civilization trait is to be able to handle nihilism without depression.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. There's so much of the nihilist and existentialist author were French, really. And we get educated with this in early college, very early. So our brain is still the brain of a teenager, and we are exposed to these ideas. Somehow, when I read Albert Camus, I'm not convinced that he has reached the level of blackpilling and absurdity that I reach. But at least he says it. He claims that he's blackpilled and he's facing the absurdity of the universe. And so this gives you a tool to get out of the black pill depressed feeling. Now, I consider that I've reached points of blackpilling that are so much deeper than Albert Camus that it's like a children singing in a choir that this guy is beside me. But it's interesting to have someone who at least claimed that he was blackpilled to see what his solutions were. Robert says, Jews have created for themselves a state. We're sitting here with our thumbs up our ass. Lunar Octopus says, Jeff, what is your favorite Star Wars film? Or do you even like Star Wars? All right. I have the most unpopular opinion on this. My favorite Star Wars movies are 1, 2, 3, the one that came later.
That explains everything. That explains Lord of the Rings. Okay. I'm going to just swivel in my chair while you.
I mean, I just can't watch 4, 5, and 6 and be entertained. That's it. And I know people hate me for this. I know it's not the popular opinion, but to me, 1, 2, and 3 have more of a political sense to them. And by the way, I hate all Star Wars movies. But if you ask me what are my favorites, it's 1, 2, and 3.
I knew it. What you want is a 90-minute discussion about trade disputes with with fantasy aesthetics. That's like the perfect JF film. That would be like the JF Academy Award winner. Is just
every gunshot in a movie is like one less point. Every action scene is like, oh, this action scene was not justified. But after we're done with the super chat, we'll talk about Terminator 2, in which all action scenes are justified in my view. And because they fit in the wider framework of the movie, I'm fine with them. It's like you can really violate. It's like an act of aggression against my brain when you start adding action scenes. But let's talk about this later. Robert says, I will not read this one. He says, read the Fu King super chat. And by the way, the way he writes Fu King reminds me of District 9, of course. I don't know if it's a South African white guy who has this accent in the movie. The main character says Fu King.
Reminds me of Conor McGregor.
Yeah, exactly.
You know that.
Gang Ung says, thanks for the content. Robert says, your French brain couldn't read the super chat. Hey, calm down, Robert. Here I am reading the super chat. Sometimes it just takes time. Duke de Salt says, are postmodernists just performing postmodern performance piece in the form of politics? Literally just memeing. There are so many P's in this sentence. I was like, what the fuck? Robert says, $2 to stop you spinning in your chair. I will not stop. $2 is not enough. Slamurai Jam Down says $2 to spin the chair into the heavens and above. Frank Underwood sends 100 NOK. Have you seen They Live from 1988? It's the ultimate movie about red pilling and how the protagonist is a true Chad and he reacts to having his society subverted. I haven't seen this movie.
You haven't seen it? Oh,
Nope.
JF, you have to. It's essential. It is totally
Really?
essential. And just to tie this back to the original, our first debate here, ask yourself if Rowdy, what's his name? Rod Piper? Rowdy Piper, whatever his name is. I don't. Ask yourself if he's more like Conan the Barbarian or Edward Norton from Fight Club. It's just an amazing thing, though. It really is a great film, I reckon.
I will watch it. Lunar Octopus says 1, 2, and 3 are my favorites as well. Do you prefer the Republic or Separatist? I don't know what he refers to by 1, 2, and 3.
Seems to be Star Wars.
Oh, yeah, okay. I don't even remember the movies enough to tell you which side I would be on. It's just, I like that there was a better illustration of the political dimensions. Whereas in 4, 5, and 6, you have to guess the political dimension through an action movie. That's essentially what I liked. Alright, so we are done with the super chats for now. Let's quickly comment on the 2 last movies before we throw in the votes for the public. So, Total Recall. I wanted to bring it. I know it's a cheesy movie in many ways with the 80s music and the 80s aesthetics, but it is an interesting movie in that, just like Memento, it is the exploration of a psychological hypothesis. What happens if we allow touristic brain induced touristic traveling? In other words, you get plugged into a machine and it gives you the impression that you've been taking 2 weeks of vacation by playing out a story in your head. And it's beautiful. And the way it ends, where essentially this whole touristic experiment that Arnold Schwarzenegger has went through included the ending where he the ending is a glorious ending. Actually, I think there's two alternate ending. One where he kisses the girl, and one where his face explodes in the empty atmosphere of Mars. And you realize, okay, the whole movie was just within the brain of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it was playing out what had already been planned out by those who designed the touristic experiment. Did you watch this movie?
I loved it. It's great. I agree with you on this. This is, I think, Total Recall. And I don't even see it as cheesy. I see it as it has that camp aesthetics where it's like when you go so far, there's that quote, any mistakes made through boldness can be corrected through more boldness. It's like when you go out so far on a limb on that kind of cheesiness, it kind of becomes cool. And I love Total Recall for I think it's just a great film. Explores so many interesting angles. I will say the love aspect was kind of weird to me. Like it's the female characters in there weren't super relatable to me. But other than that, like the love story I didn't really get it. But other than that, I thought it was fantastic.
Absolutely. Now, Terminator 2, that's a serious candidate to me. Terminator 2 succeeds at being an innovative science fiction scenario in terms of time traveling. And at the same time, it embeds into this narrative a story about fatherhood and about, I think it completes Fight Club very well, because where Fight Club tells you your fathers have abandoned you, God has been made to the image of your father, what does that tell you about God? Terminator 2 almost says the same thing. Terminator 2 and John Connor are essentially the child who are deprived of a father through the circumstances of the world. However, and I will take the whole Terminator sequels, because it's not that the 2 is particularly important, but I think it's the most well made in this series. But if you take the whole story of Terminators, it's essentially John Connor, through his own innovation, being abandoned by the circumstances and finding himself parentless, finding himself with foster parents due to circumstances, creating his own father and sending his own father back into the future to care for himself. And so there is a point at which Sarah Connor writes on the picnic table with a knife, she writes, "No fate but what we make." And I believe that what this movie is telling us is no father, but those we made. And on top of being about father-child relationship and the deprivation of the father-child relationship in modern society, it's also about autism. Because essentially Terminator 2 is the autistic parent. It's the parent that's successful at forming a pillar for John Connor, a pillar of emotional stability. And he does so by essentially being autistic and asocial, which, as Sarah Connor phrases it in what I consider to be one of the most beautiful narration in all of cinema history, where she says something like, I don't remember the exact words, but it's like, there I knew that the Terminator would never leave. Of all the would-be fathers that would get drunk, that would yell at them, the Terminator would never leave. He would always be there. And to me, that's the image of the autistic father, which is unfit to society. And Sarah Connor adds, in an insane world, he was the same choice. And this movie reminds us of what's the function of a father. It's that in an insane world, they are the only pillar on which a child can rely.
Hmm. That's interesting. I never really thought about the father-son dynamics in Terminator.
All right. And another one that I have in my list before we allow the voting, Rambo 4. I know people are going to tell me Rambo 4 is pretty late. Why not Rambo 1, Rambo 2? Well, Rambo 4 is a clean story. It's not a complex story. It doesn't satisfy my French brain, but it is the story of the love for a woman that you won't fuck in the end. But she is so beautiful, and you are such an evolutionary dead end in being an old man that you say, fuck it. I'm going to be the Chad of this woman, and I'm not even going to fuck her. That's what John Rambo is in Rambo 4. He has this sexy blonde coming to him, which 20 years later and 20 years earlier in his life, he could have not only shot his machine gun on all these terrorists and save the girl and fuck her. What I love about Rambo 4 is he will listen to this Chad instinct, knowing that he's not going to get the girl at the end. And in that sense, it is a story of purity. And it is a story that really takes you by the guts. And some of the quotes are just beautiful, like, when you're pushed, killing's as easy as breathing.
Dude, JF, to hear you tell the story, Rambo 4 is like an art house romantic comedy.
What?
Well, because all you've talked about are like the love scenes, and like, I just wouldn't go to Rambo 4, for like movies that have like the most culturally relevant like romantic dynamics. But I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen the Rambo series, but I don't know. Just on the face of it, this seems like the imperfection in your Persian rug of greatest movies candidates.
Absolutely. It is an imperfection, and I live well with it. I may have been touched because personally, I mean, I've been going out with young females, young adult females, and it really touched me there into seeing like this old man being completely useless, but making an act of generosity in the end without having anything back from it. And it reminded me going out with these dumpster unworthy women and giving them everything, and having all of my services drained and my time. And it really touched me in the heart, but that's probably a personal thing. I'm not saying you should go watch Rambo 4. It's probably not even the best Rambo movie.
Wait, I just to close that up, I want to make sure I'm getting this right. So Conan the Barbarian is not in the list of greatest because there's action scenes and fighting, but Rambo 4 is because he can get a girl that he doesn't bang, and there's there's a lot of bullets. I don't recall Rambo 4 in particular, but doesn't your like minus a point for every bullet? Aren't we dinging it pretty hard when you're talking about like machine gun fire, like Gatling gun style every third
Here's
scene?
Here's the thing, Frame Game. You're really digging deep into my brain here. I'm going to explain to you how it works in my brain. And I'm not saying it's rational. I'm just telling you what's happening in my biased brain.
They're bullets of love, right?
Rambo is the framework in which it's proper to do that. Rambo is the guy who has the machine gun and who shoots. And there's kind of a humorous passage in my brain where you can forgive it to Rambo because that's what Rambo does. Rambo shoots infinite amounts of bullets. So I forgive to Rambo. I don't with Conan.
Okay, I actually understand what you're saying because it sort of goes by that
thing too.
Yeah,
there is an element of blackpilling in Rambo, where in Conan it is pure naiveness. So in Rambo, you really are at an evolutionary dead end. You have a man who has no hope and who just works on his kind of instinct. His instinct is to save the cute girl, to do what she wants him to do. And it's a story of cockery in the end. And it's something that touches me to see a symbol of masculine power essentially be cocked by a cute woman who won't suck his dick. I don't know. It really touches me. I don't know why.
This is just such a quintessentially JF. The whole way you've teed this up. See, you have this thing that you do, which I think is very addictive to the audience, which is like you make like 90%, somewhere between 80 and 90% of the argument is like scientific based, like very surgical, methodical. And then there's about 10 to 20% that is just pure rank bait. Indefensibly so, but you hold frame on it, and it creates this mental vacuum in the audience searching for catharsis, the same way they might watch like a Mayweather fight hoping that like this thing will get, this defense will get penetrated. And I think that's what you've done with Rambo 4. I don't think you really mean it. I think it's kind of like the nihilism thing with you. It's this is like a part of your duality, not the singularity of who you are.
Absolutely. And I'm going to recognize something right now. I was essentially mentally prepared to Rambo 4 before even seeing it. I was like, oh, I had convinced myself that this was going to be one of the best movies in the history of time. I remember going to the cinema with this idea in mind.
And that made it better. It's impressive. Yeah. It usually works in reverse.
All right, so I will be putting the voting link in the chat. Everyone, go vote for what is your favorite movie. You can vote for multiple movies if you'd like. And I'm going to take a 30-second break, and you too, Frame Game, if you want. And we'll be back and see the results. All right. I am back. Are you back, Frame Games?
I am as well.
Okay, we have the results, at least for now. I think that not everyone has voted yet, but it does seem... Let me try to refresh to the most recent view. It does seem that Fight Club is leading, with Terminator 2 in second position, with Lord of the Rings, then American History X, then Matrix, then Conan the Barbarian, The Godfather, we forgot to talk about The Godfather.
Yeah.
Total Recall, Memento, and Rambo 4. I have to say, I didn't make a good case for Rambo 4. Maybe a few comments on The Godfather before we move to the worst movies of all time. The Godfather is so complex. And the beauty of this movie is, well, there are many things. First, the complexity of the social situation that's being illustrated, the idea of continuation between the father and the child, the double meaning of Godfather. So is Godfather being the godfather of the child, or is Godfather being the godfather of the mafia. But I think the most beautiful thing in this movie is the way an environment of violence is illustrated with, in the end, very little action, very little violence. So they make this weight of violence and control be felt through the movie, not by showing murders too much. There are a few murders, but you feel it from just the social pressure system that is at the heart of the way the mafia operates.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love that film. It's obviously the whole trilogy is a classic, and exactly what you said. The violence colors it without being focused on it, and I think the thing that makes Godfather transcend an action movie or a mob movie or a sort of titillating piece of film, and just with a great dialogue and narrative arc and cinematography and all that, is the family aspect of it. At the end of the day, Godfather is a family movie. It's a movie about your roots, the people most closely connected to you, when they do right and when they do wrong. And it's one of the things that I think is one of the reasons that I put, Conan on there, and why I had some qualms with movies like Fight Club and some of the other ones that I felt were disconnected from ancestry. And Godfather is so interesting because the entire thing is a family affair. And even when you think about what a godfather is, a godfather is somebody who is not technically related to you, but who is functionally like a father figure to you. And the godfather is called the godfather because he is a father figure. He offers the protection and security to the entire community that relies on him for favors or protection. Um, and it's about how the family of the mob uh, sort of acts as the godfather of the surrounding community, and the corruption and some of the humanity that comes from that.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful movie. I'm refreshing now because people are saying Lord of the Ring took over. So there
No,
are two progresses with the new results. Lord of the Ring has become second place and Matrix is going up. It is in fact very close to second place, and Terminator 2 is going down. I think it gives an appreciation of the crowd we have. The crowd does enjoy Fight Club. I think it's really a, as we said on our analysis on my channel of the full movie, it's a really white guy movie. It's hard to explain how much of a white guy movie it is.
I
All
don't
right,
know. I kind of feel like we got raided by the Lord of the Rings subreddit when one of the mods had a Google alert set up for whenever Lord of the Rings is mentioned on the internet. That's just my opinion.
gentlemen, our attention is required. There is a very important vote. I really want the Lord of the Ring to be winning this one. Let's do it, gentlemen. I'm imagining the guy who leads the
Yeah.
Lord of the Ring,
Yeah.
the Lord of
Yeah.
the Ring geeky forums.
I can see it, man.
All right. So now the worst movies of all time. We will not spend as much time because, of course, a worst movie does not require much philosophical analysis, although sometimes they might. Starting with Zootopia. That's one
Zo-
you brought.
Yeah, this was my candidate for all-time worst movie ever produced. Most subversive, most horrifying, most rotten. And let me just I doubt many people here have seen it because it was a Disney kids movie produced in 2016. Have you seen it, JF?
I watched it this afternoon, quick. I was shocked by, for example, the little rabbit, or I don't know if they call it a rabbit, but she's essentially represented as the young person who will violate the norms of society. It's like rabbits don't become policemen, and she's like, I want to become a policeman, and it's really it's really suggestive of the old LGBT breaking of social norms and this whole generation that's emerging and that's breaking the rules.
Yeah. So you saw how much of what percent of the movie did you
I
see
mean, I
for?
fast forwarded
Mhm.
through it. I don't
Okay.
know this movie much.
Okay. Let me break down a quick plot summary for the chat so that we can all square up on the same page before why I pronounce this to be the all-time number one worst movie ever produced. Um, Here is just a quick summary that I just found online. In the town of Bunnyborough, a 9-year-old bunny, Judy Hopps, is performing a school play. Her theme explains that animals, once primitive and wild, have now evolved to where predators and prey can live side by side in harmony. The founding mammal city, Zootopia, is hailed as a place where anyone can be anything. Judy then announces she wants to be a police officer. A kid fox in the audience, Gideon Gray, sneers at the idea, and Judy's parents, Bonnie and Stu, tell her not to do it, that Bunny's never been a police officer, but she's willing to try out against all odds. She goes on to move to Zootopia, and because of a diversity affirmative action program under the new mayor, to bring on prey species rather than predator species. That is, things like bunnies instead of lions and these and tigers and bears, who were the only police officers before, because naturally you would predict that the larger, more predatory animals would be better suited for law enforcement than, say, a bunny trying to enforce the law against a large beast. But anyway, so she goes on, she tries out, she only gets in because of this affirmative action program. But then once she's in, she becomes number one in the class by far. She can do everything. Okay. This little bunny is faster than every other thing. She's faster than the cheetahs. She's stronger than the elephants. She outboxes the kangaroos. Everything. She's like the perfect Mary Sue character. Invincible, morally perfect, everything. So at first you were tempted to think, oh, well, the affirmative action program, whatever your thoughts on affirmative action, after watching her conquer the police academy to be number one in the class, the audience is left with this thought that, affirmative action is awesome. In fact, everyone who gets in who would otherwise be underqualified or not meet standards is probably going to be like this bunny. We should double down on them. Anyway, so she goes on to become a cop. But of course, because of systemic discrimination and racism against bunnies, she's tasked as a meter maid when everyone else is tasked as, crime fighting adventurers. She goes on to befriend this sly fox who dupes her, but then becomes sort of like her best friend uh, character, again, who's technically a prey because he's a fox. Goes on to, even though she's a meter maid, she signs up to solve this mystery where all of these predators have gone missing throughout Utopia. It's like the first time in its history that like something's wrong. And then there's this crime spree where these prey are getting violently assaulted and mauled all over the city by predators. And so there is now this, like the main plot, device in the I guess pivot point that the movie turns around is that there's suddenly disharmony in Zootopia because predators are acting on their biological instincts, and all of the lions and tigers and foxes are attacking the sheep and the meek and the bunnies, and suddenly diversity and diversity politics is under threat because of biology. Okay, so you're with me so far.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
Marxist movie essentially.
but you have to get here's what happens. The major plot twist in Zootopia, and the thing that makes it the worst, most subversive movie of all time, is that the the climax point in the movie is the discovery that what's really is that she makes this press conference as a police officer after being heralded for breaking this case, where they ask, well, why are they doing this? Why are the bears mauling the bunnies all of a sudden? How could this possibly happen? And she does this press conference. She's like, I don't know. I guess maybe they're just bears. acting the way bears do around bunnies. And then that becomes this whole SJW media kerfuffle in Zootopia. Her fox friend turns on her, and it turns out that it wasn't, in fact, the bears just acting as they are, uh, as they're biologically predisposed to do, as you would expect with bears around bunnies. No, in fact, a subversive class of upper class prey from the deputy mayor is actually
Whoa.
shooting, going around the city, shooting predators with paintballs that have embedded in them a certain chemical that makes them suddenly turn primal. So it's actually the the proxy here is that it's actually the institutionally racist white upper class who is going around shooting the underclass with paintballs that make them that's the explanation for the disproportionate crime rates. It's actually white racism, not anything wrong culturally or whatnot with what the diversity is actually manifesting as. And it's
Absolutely
and
subversive.
and it reminds me of that Twitter post that sort of became a meme, which was like this black girl on Twitter who like posted pictures of like African masks or something that were like slated to be realistic but weren't at all. And she was like, "This is what white people are wearing when they go into the inner city to commit crimes and then blame it on black people. It's actually white people wearing black masks. That's the explanation." And except it's even more subversive than that because it blames this kind of like conspiracy theory of like systemic white racism as being the underlying agent for any kind of ethnic violence. And that at the end of the day, you can always point the finger at white people high up in kind of Trumpian type administrations for any dysfunction that happens in the lower classes. But it does it with these kind of compelling aesthetics, totally first rate, multi-$100 million production value. And it's like the perfect propaganda piece, uh, complete with music from like Shakira and protest movements that look exactly like BLM. It's the worst thing I've ever seen, I think, in cinema, and must watch to understand.
All right. I haven't watched it, so I take your case. It's a solid case. I have a similar issue with Inside Out. So Inside Out, a feminist propaganda movie. I love that when I said that it was a feminist propaganda on Twitter movie, people ask me, why is it a feminist propaganda movie? And I was like, well, it puts forward the idea of female feelings. And someone answered, oh yeah, the feminist idea of feelings. And yes, the way Inside Out frames feelings as being this kind of unquestionable thing that emerges into the female mind and that we need to satisfy. This is one of the many Disney movies that advocates for essentially female instability, where the crises of the young female are to be cared for. It's like this bubble of anarchy, but you need to listen to her. And if you properly listen to her, there's going to be some points that will be entered into her scoring system for you. Because all of these personalities inside the main character's mind, they are essentially all hysteric. And so it kind of creates the image. I think this is essentially a propaganda movie for young boys to say, okay, a normal female has all these dysfunctional personality inside of her. And what you need to find is the proper key of caring for her so that the points in her point system will be correct. And they essentially frame winning the female mind as a point system based game. And it's very vicious for young boys to be watching this because it essentially creates the rewarding experience of the game. As she accumulates these bubble of happiness into her mind, it's like a rewarding experience where, oh, you just scored a point. Um, I think that the way it represents memories is defective. The way the way it presents like the core, they call it, I think, the core emotions or the core experiences. It's essentially moments of her life that have built her identity, which constructs islands that she could use. This is very worrying, to be caring that much about female feelings rather than denunciating some of these feelings, because you have the crazy professor in purple, you have the angry man in red, you have the depressed version here in blue, and the kind of disgusted face reaction in green. All of these are essentially pathologies, but they are normalized in Inside Out, and to that extent, I believe this movie is dangerous to show to a children.
Yeah, well, I had an aversion to seeing that. Obviously, I try not to see like I mean, whenever there's something that directly touches on biology from the SJW perspective. Like I wasn't expecting biology in Zootopia. I wasn't expecting them to go that route. But this is obviously, just it would be totally horrific. I can imagine. I can only imagine that it's every bit as bad as you're teeing it up to be. But what I would say is that your point about emotions is codified now into the SJW, the social justice technical lexicon, through the term of art now called lived experience.
Absolutely.
And what it is it is a explicit, dead on attack on scientific reasoning, on logical construction, by saying that if your logic if it denies my lived experience, then it is offensive and blasphemous for you to articulate your logic. And so it is the explicit prioritization of feelings over facts.
Absolutely.
And not only that, denying the entry of them into evidence. Like it's like a court of law where it's not just saying, well, listen, you can put those facts into evidence, you can submit that to the jury, but at the end of the day, the jury should vote in my favor because of my line of reasoning. It's saying your facts are part of the parade of commas, racist, sexist, Islamophobic, big, whatever, ableist, all the way down the line. So the jury isn't even allowed to consider them,
Yeah.
because the only thing the jury should be able to consider is my personal, narrow, fucking lived experience. Which, by the way, they just added letters to that phrase to try to make it seem technical. It's just your fucking feelings.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Very quick on this other candidate, Big Mama's House, a movie in which a black guy plays a fat black woman. This is particularly triggering when you remember the interview of Dave Chappelle, where he explains essentially these Hollywood producers want the black actors to play fat females, and it's creepy, and he doesn't understand why, and he told them, no, I won't do it. When you see that an actor has actually accepted to do that for a very poorly made comedic movie, where all sorts of clownish things happen, I don't see how you can laugh at this movie above 60 IQ. Above 60 IQ, you start finding it cringe, and I don't know what else to say. It is a terrible, terrible movie.
It's amazing. You see things like this sometimes. I'm just reading a description. I haven't seen it. In order to protect a beautiful woman and her son from a robber, a male FBI agent disguises himself as a large grandmother. That's amazing. This reminds me of there's this great like 2-minute skit on how Vice writes news articles, and it's just like a guy sitting in a white room by himself, sort of stumped, having writer's block. He closes his eyes, he puts one hand over his face, he reaches out, picks up a large pink dildo, throws it at a board with 3 columns, and one of them was like identity group, another one was marginalized country, and another one was like drug of choice. And it's just got like a couple dozen in each category, and he just throws three pink dildos, at each of the columns, and then it shows up as a Vice article, like underprivileged, like Zulu drug runners experiencing oppression at the Mexican border. Right, that's like what I see Big Mama's house. It's just like a jambalaya of kind of degeneracy. But
All
yeah,
right.
I don't even know how to get around that.
And just before the vote, Matrix 2, you brought this proposition. Oh, did we lose you?
Oh, I'm here.
Okay,
Oh,
you're
Matrix
back.
2. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I thought you were reading a super chat from someone named Stu. Yeah, Matrix 2 is on my worst movies of all time list because it's the movie that made me stop believing in God. I mean, I was bar mitzvahed and confirmed, which is 2 years of study after Hebrew school. And when I saw The Matrix 2, nothing made sense. I went through about a 3 week period where I didn't understand cosmically how the world worked anymore because it couldn't have been possible that something that Matrix 1 could have been followed by Matrix 2. And that kind of when you had that experience where you had high expectations of Rambo 4 and you still enjoyed the movie, I had sky high expectations for Matrix 2, and it was the worst thing I've ever experienced in terms of cultural. It literally threw me into an existential crisis. It started off decent, and then sometime around that infinity length fight scene at the beginning of the movie, everything went like religiously bad. It was like an assault on everything that the Matrix 1 stood for. It was an assault on like my aesthetic sense. Nothing fucking made sense. Everything was the good parts were too short, the long parts were too long. And it embraced an ideology that totally was divorced from that, your life is in your hands, white knuckle, struggle through it all. And it was just everything is fate, everything is nihilism, everything's out of your hands. Zion, instead of being this great place where people are doing good things, is just a degenerate shithole where everyone's infighting all the time. Uh, the this had already everything had already happened 7 times before, so it didn't really matter whether or not Zion lived or died. Neo didn't even have any special powers at the end of the day. The agents were bigger and better than him anyway. Everything was 180'd, and it didn't make any sense to me at the time. And I never even saw Matrix 3 other than like a few random clips on YouTube. Because it scarred me. It was like trauma.
Absolutely. It was an extremely profitable movie with a budget of maximum 150 million and they grossed 740 million. So they made a cheap movie and they surfed on the popularity of it to get a lot of cash from it. I have the same view as you in Matrix 2. I wasn't that impressed by Matrix 1, but Matrix 2 is completely empty of any philosophical consideration. It is not an interesting movie. They just play with the theme of multiple agents and it's all action. It has no interest for me. So I stand with you on this being one of the worst movies of all time, especially given that they had the budget, they had the first movie, they had a philosophically interesting question to work with. So let's have the vote of the public. I will be putting the link in the chat and we will finally review all of your votes for the best and the worst movies of all time. Let's
I
have
should
a look at
say,
the.
yes, sir,
Oh, go ahead.
go for it. I just want to make a quick point that I think attempts to justify the existence of Matrix 2 is like a Robert Trivers style self deception thing. Like it's an act to protect yourself against the emotional trauma that something so bad could exist in the world following something so good.
All right, let's look at the super chat. Sean McInnes says, I'm new to the stream and I'm wondering if you have discussed Network, the movie from 1976, the black Marxist in the movie, as well as Ned Beatty's speech. I haven't. I'm not aware of that movie. By the way, one movie popped out in my mind. If you guys are looking for a good documentary movie, I forgot to include it in the best movies of all time. But what I'm really fascinated about are documentaries. And the documentary startup.com, which follows real people during the technological bubble, is absolutely fascinating. That's what a good French documentary movie looks like, although it is not a French documentary movie. It's an American one, but where you really see the reality of these people bullshitting their way through the technology market and then crashing. It is pure beauty.
Hmm. Interesting. I wonder if there could be a modern remake for
Startup.com.
Bitcoin.
Well, I don't know if there are like Bitcoin corporate agents. I don't even know. But these guys, they were making their way through the first websites on the internet, and they wanted to be the websites where people pay their parking tickets, and they wanted to secure that market. And it's pretty beautiful how it crashes and how you
Cool.
see the interaction between the technical team, the guy who's more geek and the guy who's more business oriented and who's more a bullshitter and a seller. It's really beautiful, and they also go into their personal life. It's really heartbreaking.
Hmm.
Robert says tacos over daughters, Tibbets over glory. I don't know what that means. Tacos over daughter. Storm Chaser says untouchable, fighting corruption. Robert says, since your girlfriend, I will not read this one. I will be removing it. Elizabeth Jackson says, JF, what about Biodome? Well, I didn't want to be as provocative as adding Biodome in the list of the best movies ever, but to me it is a personal favorite of mine. First, it has a scientific dimension to it, which is exciting for a teenager like me who was interested in science. And it has this kind of careless college attitude to it, which is very cheesy, but it's well made, and I enjoy watching Biodome.
Okay.
One other thing that I added to the best movies of all time, Contact. For a scientifically minded guy
Hmm.
like me, Contact was very fun. There's even a retransmission from the extraterrestrial entity of a speech by Adolf Hitler. It's quite fascinating as a movie. I think that the little psychological explanation at the end is kind of disrupting. It kind of breaks the science and all this, but it's a fascinating movie for people who are minded about life everywhere in the universe and how we could receive transmissions from them and detect what they're saying to us.
Yeah, I
Jonas
really enjoyed
Nielsen Jonas Nilsson says, did you ever watch Lord of the Rings? One of the themes is fate versus free will. Also, Lord of the Ring is not some low culture social criticism. It is high culture idealism. I agree with you, totally. But that's, I like a little more dirty than this. But
that.
I'm a Frenchman. Robert says, I'm lolling from my fourth bank account. Mendel Brodsat says Zootopia is a race realist, multiculturalist film. Robert says, we just bears. Gnan Ogn, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but he says, nice to catch your show live. Producer Chris sends $20. Thank you so much. Some points you make are accurate, but you're making parallelism too broad. Zootopia is overall a red-pilled movie because the media, government, and corrupt politicians cause all the problem. What would you answer to this, Firm Game?
Oh my, you're totally ass backwards on this. You have to again. It's like the point that we made about American History X and Fight Club. To me, the last paragraph of the movie infuses the entire. It, it is the final say. It is the beginning and end of the moral imperative that infuses the audience members with a political call to action. And it's not red pilled because what it says is that any differences, any dysfunction whatsoever is 100% unilaterally due to white people sneaking into the bedrooms of minority groups and shooting them with paintballs that make them act bad whenever they act bad, but when like no agency. I mean, even from like a DR3 like Dinesh D'Souza conception of group relationships, this is it robs people of agency. It's saying so there's nothing red pilled about it, because the only time that there are differences in this multicultural utopia are when it's bad things happening caused by white people. Point blank, period.
All right, Robert says, Frames, you're about to max rixt. I don't know what that means. Ryan MF says, please see the YouTube channel Black Pilled and his video How Boomers Were Taught to Hate Themselves, an analysis of the 1979 movie Norma Ray. I don't know about it. I'll have a look at it. Alexander Olson sends $10. He says, also with Inside Out, they also were trying to make the little girl trans because she's the only character with male and female emotions, while everyone else is either male or female. That's true. That's another subversive aspect of this movie. All right, Friend Games, we are done. Are you ready for the results?
I'm ready for the results. Hit me.
So a review of the updated results for the best movie of all time. Fight Club and Lord of the Ring, they come tie. Matrix 1 comes very close second, Terminator 2, and then The Godfather, American History X, Conan the Barbarian, Total Recall, Memento, and Rambo 4.
Pretty
Now
good.
for the worst movie of all time, Zootopia wins the end. Big Mama's House is second position. Matrix 2 is third, and Inside Out is fourth. Well, it was really great doing this review with you, Frame Games. Titan sends $14.33. He says, is there any movie about Atlantropa? Secondly, do you know what Atlantropa is? What are the biological implications of this project? Worth it? As Miss Yukis would say, pass or smash? Well, Atlantropa, I'm not aware of what it is. Is it like a project for an ethnostate in the Atlantic?
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
Let's actually Google it just to be aware of what he's talking about. Also referred to as Panropa, was a gigantic engineering and colonization idea devised by the German architect Armand Sorgel in the 1920s and promoted by him until his death. So essentially, its central feature was a hydroelectric dam to be built across the Strait of Gibraltar, which would have provided enormous amounts of hydroelectricity.
Yeah. See, now that's a positive use of things. I mean, as opposed to burning down the credit card companies, just build a hydroelectric dam.
I can't believe you take the ending of Fight Club so personally. Do you have investment in credit card companies, Friend Game?
I'll tell you what, I'm very bearish on Edward Norton's character, in his relationship 2 weeks later. So I have an investment in the sense that I am short shares in the Marla Singer Tyler Durden relationship.
All right, Frame Games, it was a pleasure talking to you. I think we both made our cases for our favorites, and it was at times rational, at times emotional, but that's what the movie industry is.
All right, you too. GG.
Bye-bye.